Good afternoon, everybody. It is 12 noon on the 4th of December. We are getting up to Christmas, not that far away. So really lovely to see everybody here today. And my name's Mary Gregory. This is the 7th episode of Lessons in Leadership. And I'm really delighted to welcome our guest today, who is Paul Spiers. Hello, Paul.
Good morning, Mary.
So Paul and I don't know each other that well. We have met, as you do, you connect over the internet and you start building your network that way. And we actually met through connecting on Paul's podcast, which is the new P&L, Principles and Leadership. So I really like the whole idea that it's not all about profit and loss. It's about principles and leadership. And my experience of Paul was that he's a real deep thinker. And I think my dog agrees with that as well, Paul. So apologies for that. He's a real deep thinker about business, and the questions that he asked me, I found incredibly stretching and thought-provoking. So, Paul, that's one of the reasons I've invited you to join us today. And I know that you're also the founder of the Brand Purpose Institute as well, Principles and Leadership Institute. So I just want to invite you to share a little bit about your story and what's brought you to be this stand for brand purpose and brand values.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for inviting me today. And
pleasure.
I'm very pleased to be, for my profile to be raised in the canine community as well. So thank you. In terms of how I've got to where I have today, I've spent roughly 30 years in brand reputation management and communications and so on. A few years back, as a result of a few things happening in business, I came up with the idea of the new P&L because I felt at that time, certain experiences I'd had in my own agency, I felt there needed to be a better way of doing business, if you like, something that focused, as you said, more than just on profit and loss, but on principles and leadership. The idea of the new P&L sort of sat with me for a few years while I did other things and developed other entrepreneurial ventures. And I couldn't really find a vehicle for it at that point. And then last year, somewhere in the back of my brain, the idea of a podcast and the idea of the new P&L came together. So I thought I'd test the water and see how it developed. And it just seemed to resonate terrifically with the audience and with guests. So much so that this year we took it full time, and I now run the new P&L Institute, as you said, working with brands to re-engage their purpose and their principles. And I think to bust a few of those myths around purpose being this fluffy, values-driven thing that really doesn't apply to business. Actually, it's essential to the focus of the business and essential to the commercial success of the business. And that's what we're doing with the Institute, just trying to re-engage businesses on that values side.
That sounds fantastic, and I like that you mentioned the fluffy thing that sometimes purpose and values is looked at that in that way, and what I'm realizing over the years, when you look back to how things were even 10 years ago, that the shift that there's been to really valuing those things that were considered the softer skills, which are actually really the hard skills, because without them you can't have a business that functions. So just share a bit more about, what is it about purpose and values that is so important to businesses today?
When I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and we were talking about the importance of self-awareness and leadership. And I said at the time, self-awareness as a leader, we need empathy, we need strength, we need compassion and purpose and so on. But none of those things are ultimately achievable without a very acute sense of self-awareness. So for me, it's almost the most important characteristic of a leader, but genuine self-awareness is the greatest challenge, because we all think we're self-aware, but how do you identify what level of self-awareness you have to deliver empathy or understanding of someone else? So a lot of around what we do with principles and leadership, and why I sort of brought it in, is to almost to provoke a conversation both with people but within ourselves as well, as to how we identify as leaders, what we're trying to achieve, and how well we genuinely identify with those we are leading and we're working with. And that's the essence behind it, I guess, to start with the inner person, the self-awareness, and then build out in terms of leadership from there.
So I love that. So it's like looking within to yourself first. What are
Absolutely.
your values? What is your purpose? And then how are you creating that and manifesting it and living it out there in the world with other people? And,
Yeah.
and you focus it very much around leadership, is what I'm hearing.
We do, because I've spent, as I said, 30 years in brand management, reputation management. And what I often found was you would have CEOs and leaders coming in, or I would work with them, and they'd say, right, off you go and do the workshop with the team. And my argument was always, I'm happy to take the money, but this is a pointless exercise if only the team is going to understand the value of the brand management or the reputation management or whatever it has to be. Everything has to start with the top. And clearly, if you're trying to drive purpose and principles and facilitate culture through the business, there's no point just focusing it on those that are working for a business. You have to have it focused on those that are leading that business, because they are, I wouldn't say they're not the most important people in the business, but they are certainly the most important in terms of driving the culture. You can have a brilliant culture at mid-level, but if it's not facilitated and led and embraced at the top, then it will only ever sit as a subculture, not as the full culture of the business. So it has to be
Yes.
leadership first.
Yes, and I think leadership and the way leaders behave has such an impact on the culture and the atmosphere that's created. And I think that's been proven time and time again, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
So there's very much about leadership is from within first and from within me first. How do you tackle something which I've come across over the years, and I think is probably an ongoing challenge for many businesses and organizations, where there's kind of the set of values, it's up on the wall, or it might even be put in the drawer, we don't know, but there is a set of values up there and it doesn't really get lived. So for example, I've seen organizations, we put people first, which means we put our customers first, we put our staff first, but actually in reality that isn't happening. So how do you address that, Paul?
I think that the values on the wall example is indicative of what we suffer more generally at the moment in society, where everything is in sound bites and there's no context. I mean, you don't have context to something, it leads to mistrust and misunderstanding and a lack of empathy towards one another. So I start by sitting down with a leader or a group of management team, and say, what do these values mean to you? Why are they the values of the business? Demonstrate to me, not just in verbal terms. Don't sit here over the next hour and tell me that this is what happens, but provide me with the practical evidence of how you deliver value X, Y, and Z in the business. And then what I'll often do is go to the employees and conduct a very similar series of interviews or conversations with, or a workshop with them, and see whether those values are being filtered down. So one of the dangers in business is the leaders make assumptions that the employees understand the way the business works, the way the values are, the way the culture is, and so on, without really demonstrably articulating how those values need to be played out. So once I've done both of those series of interviews or had both of those conversations, understood the practical delivery of those values into the business, then I sit back down with the leadership and say, this is what you told me. This is probably the reality of what we face within the business. Even with your best endeavors and best intentions, for some reason, it's not filtering down, let's say. So how do we change the communications process? Because with the best will in the world, the most ambitious and desirable and well-meaning values won't filter through an organization if the communication process isn't robust.
Okay, so it's that quality of how that communication process works, as well as what is delivered. And something I come up against, certainly when I'm working with clients, and I'm sure you do as well, is when you're wanting to shift maybe the culture and how communication is acted throughout the organization, is resistance, which in my world is people's anxiety and their fear. So what sort of resistance do you come up against at the senior levels where people might be, and I've experienced senior leaders being reluctant to shift their own behavior? How do you address that?
Again, I think it comes back to context. So first, understanding why they don't feel there's a need for change. And quite often, you probably find the same thing. Quite often, that is the prevalent attitude, where it seems to be working, but most businesses don't recognize they're in slow decline until it's too late, or the culture has major issues until it's too late. So I want to start with those leaders understanding why they think things are okay the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
Can they again demonstrate to me why they think things are okay the way they are? And then demonstrate some of the values of why you may be able to change, what the benefits of that change may be, and what the evidences are, or the evidence is in other businesses, of those subtle changes that you make to business, the bringing together of employees and leadership, and what that means for a more collaborative and creative and cohesive culture. So
Yes.
again, it's just all about not making any assumptions on my part or on their part, but understanding the context that the conversation brings to that, to that discussion with me.
Yeah.
Why do they believe what they're believing?
Yes. Yes. So really getting underneath the skin of it, really, and trying
Really.
to access where their motivation and drive might be. So that's fantastic. And it's lovely to have heard a bit more about your journey itself, to where you've got to be. But what I'm also curious about here is your experience in your own learning journey as a leader. So what I'm curious about is a moment that really shifted, helped. I mean, you alluded to it maybe at the beginning, but it really shifted your perspective, or it shook you in some way that it's impacted you, and it still affects how you show up as a leader today. So would you be willing to share a story around that, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been probably three major turning points, if you like, in my professional career. One long before I was a professional, when I was 7 years old, and I grew up in a little town called Paraparaumu in New Zealand, and the local newspaper, Cavity Observer, was giving out little vouchers that you had to collect to win a prize. Mum and Dad collected those vouchers. We won second prize, and it was an encyclopedia of the world. And that, more than any professional experience, more than anything apart from the birth of my children, has had the most profound experience, changing turning point on my entire life. Because from a little town in New Zealand, I devoured that book. Over the next 4 or 5 years, I would just read it cover to cover, time and time again, and change my perspective of what the world looked like, of my ambitions for my life. I'm in the UK, I've been here 20 years. I can put that down to that encyclopedia and the winning of that prize. So that shaped my entire life. Going to university at 23, I left school very early, 15, 16, went to university at 23. That again changed my life because it opened up so many more doors and opportunities for me. And then, as I said, the new P&L, I experienced a series of very unethical, or was a recipient of a large series of unethical events in an agency I ran at the time. It had a very profound change impact on my personal and professional life. And that's when the new P&L was born. And then, as I said earlier, it's just about thinking there's got to be more kindness, more principles, and better leadership in business. And although it took me a few years to find the vehicle for the new P&L, it fundamentally changed the way I went about my own business, the way I dealt with people, looked for people, worked with people in business. And what's been wonderful about the last year of the new P&L is uncovering how much kindness there is in business. We have this impression of how tough and cruel the business world is. Actually, it probably is an element, but you start opening the door and knocking on the door and asking people for help, and it's remarkable how much kindness exists just beneath the surface if you just scratch a little bit and ask. It's remarkable what comes back to you, and that's been the most wonderful revelation of the last 12 months. Not only have I launched something that has that at its heart, but actually the giving and the generosity and the kindness that's come to me as a result has been unbelievable.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I feel like you've given us a bonus there, because you've almost summarized 3 key learning points for yourself, and and the opening up of your hunger for knowledge and exploration, which came through that encyclopedia. But then also at the end there, the turning point when you set up the new P&L and that whole element around kindness. I think there's something there. What you're making me reflect on is it's what we focus on. If we focus on things that are unkind, that's what we'll see. But if we focus on the kindness and the support that we get, within business. That's also what we see. And I suppose I like to think that human nature, and we as human beings, there's generally more good in us than there is bad.
Yes.
And let's, particularly through these difficult times, focus on the things that are good. And it's wonderful to hear. That's a lovely share about the whole kindness in business. So thank you for that.
Pleasure.
So in sort of closing today, so your parting words to our audience that may be watching this now or they may watch it later, what would you like to share? What would be the advice you would pass on to people in terms of what you've learned and how you see leadership progressing going forward?
I think it again sort of aligns with this context point I made earlier on. We are awash with information, but we're not necessarily awash with understanding that information and gaining wisdom from it. So the one thing I'm trying to do, and clearly you are with Lessons in Leadership as well, with the long form conversation, is actually just dig a little deeper. Don't just take a soundbite of information, but actually explore and try to understand and think about why someone has said what they've said and what sits behind it, and accrue knowledge and understanding and wisdom. Don't just accrue information. That would be the best piece of advice I could give to anyone from a leadership perspective.
Oh,
Information
fantastic.
isn't power, understanding is power, I think.
Oh, that's a great distinction. Information isn't power, which is, I think, is the old world, isn't it? Information they used to think was power. It's actually understanding. And I would say maybe how you translate that understanding into some positive action.
Yeah.
So that is phenomenal. So, Paul, I just would like to say thank you so much for your insights today. You didn't let me down. Very deep, very meaningful. Sorry about the dog at the beginning, but, she obviously wanted to get in on the act. And yes, if anyone wants to connect with Paul, how do they connect with you?
Best place to go is principlesandleadership.com. All of the connections for the websites, for the podcasts are there. Contact form, you can contact us via principlesandleadership.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we're coming to the end of today's show, everybody. Thank you so much for watching episode 7. Do join us next week for Lessons in Leadership episode 8, where we have Kim Adele Platts, who is a former CEO and currently a leadership expert and executive coach. And Kim has, it's going to be very pertinent what she's talking about next week. It builds on the theme of kindness, actually, that you've opened up for us today. So thank you for that, Paul. So Kim has headed up many situations where there's been restructurings and downsizing in organizations, which I think is very pertinent for what is happening in the world at the moment. And her whole commitment and passion is about how do you approach restructure, downsizing, and keep the people at the heart of that, and use kindness as the approach you take in implementing those downsizings. So do join us 12 o'clock next week for episode 8 with Kim Adele Platts. Paul Spiers, it's been such a delight.
Thank you, Mary.
I'll see you again, no doubt. And everyone, take care. Have a great weekend. See you next week. Bye-bye.